In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to put together the best gaming PC build for $1,000, covering off the best component choices, the build process and how to assemble the PC, before taking a detailed look at performance later on. So if you want to copy this build for yourself, you can be sure you're going to get the performance you deserve. Let's do this. The new Gigabyte Z690 motherboard range provides some of the latest features and best connectivity support for the new Intel 12th Gen CPU lineup. From high-end boards which support DDR5 memory and PCIe Gen 5 to more entry-level DDR4 and Gen 4 designs. The range includes boards for all form factors, catering for a wide range of builds. Check out the full AORUS, Aero and UD board lineup at the first links below and power your build with a new Gigabyte Z690 motherboard today. As with any build, we're going to kick things off by looking at the CPU and motherboard. And that's because these two components will largely dictate many of your other part choices later on. Let's look at the CPU choice. I've selected to go for the Intel Core i5-12400F. This is their really competitive chip that doesn't have any included graphics, saving us all important money, something of course we don't need later on. This core features 6 cores and 12 threads. These are the performance core variety, so the more powerful Intel cores around, with a maximum boost clock of 4.4 GHz. Anything above 4 GHz on the boost clock is pretty good, and means older titles like a Valorant and a CSGO will be catered for just as well as AAA games. Really solid CPU and beats anything AMD have got anywhere near this price point. Intel really are back on top here. Now with an Intel CPU, we need to pick up an Intel compatible motherboard, either a Z690 or B660. I've gone for a cheaper B660 board and my choice is Gigabyte's DS3H AX. Now the AX basically means it's got Wi-Fi on board, something I know a lot of first time builders get rightfully concerned about. And you can see here our included Gigabyte Wi-Fi dongle is actually pretty snazzy, and this screws into the rear I/O of the motherboard just here and will sit on your table to give you speedy 2.4 and 5 GHz Wi-Fi bands. The budget Intel motherboards have come on so far in the last couple of years, and this is a really great board for the price point. What you're going to want to do next is locate the golden triangle on the Intel CPU. For us, it's in the bottom right-hand corner, or bottom left, depending on which side you look at it from. We're then going to match this up with the corresponding triangle on our CPU socket in the bottom left-hand corner once again. Lift up the arm on the socket itself. That will then allow you to pull up the cover, which opens the other way. Looking at this side-on sort of demonstrates that the best, allowing us to drop the CPU in, lining those triangles up, pop your retention cover back down, apply a bit of pressure with your own finger. That will then allow our black plastic cover to fly off. Then you're going to use the arm to finish the job. What we're going to do after that is we're going to move on to the RAM or the memory. This basically creates a bridge between your long-term storage and your processor, giving it all the information it needs at its fingertips. Now this kit comes from Patriot, it's their Viper Steel. You don't need to go stupidly quick on the memory, 3000 or above is going to be fine. But you do now get RAM overclocking and XMP support on B660 on this cheaper chipset, which is great to see. With AMD, memory speeds are much more important. So if you're building a Team Red system, be a lot more careful. But for Intel, you're okay. No major concerns. We're going to drop the RAM into place, apply a bit of pressure, and it will click in. Really nice, satisfying click sound on this DS3H, which is always good to see. After that, we're going to move on to the storage. Now, picking storage for a build like this is actually kind of tricky. If you go in for a 3080 tier of GPU, you have to go for a very fast Gen 4 drive. But today, that's just not necessary. Even still, a slow SSD or hard drive is going to create a bottleneck in games, making a middle ground like this Gen 3 XPG Spectrix a good bet. We've reviewed some of their drives over on our website, which you can check out, and overall been pretty impressed. We're going to install this drive into the top M.2 slot on the motherboard. To do this, we need to first remove the included retention screw. This will actually hold the drive into place, so take that out first of all. Then slide your drive into the slot at a sort of a 45-degree angle, kind of downwards, then push it down to make it flat. It's not going to stay entirely flat until you screw it down with a screw. It shouldn't feel like you're forcing the drive down. It's nice and loose, so no excess pressure needed here. But once you've done that, the drive is in. Now at this stage, we've basically completed the motherboard assembly. But there is one more thing that we can do now that'll make our lives easier later, and that's take a look at the CPU cooler. I've selected the Cooler Master Hyper 212 RGB. This is sort of an all black RGB refresh of the famous cooler that Cooler Master must have sold literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of at this point. Check out how many reviews it's got on various online websites. I'll link this alongside all the components in the description though. I'm going to install this now as it will make our lives easier, and doing so is not the easiest but not the most complicated of processes either. Open up the Hyper 212 box, and for now don't worry about the cooler itself. Just this little accessory box right here. Now in this accessory box you'll find everything that you need to actually install the cooler. From a plastic backplate which will secure the cooler to the rear of the motherboard, these handy female to female posts which will provide further mounting for the cooler, and then any excess brackets we need for the cooler itself. Let's make this really simple though. First you need to get the backplate, and with the skeleton side facing towards the rear of the motherboard, add these silver posts on each corner. Once you've done that, you grab your motherboard itself, flip it over to the rear and locate these 4 holes just at the back. These should then line up with the silver post we've just popped onto the backplate, and with a bit of luck, the whole thing will just sit nicely into place. Once you've done this, you've got then a bit of hand yoga to do to actually slide the board back onto its box without any of our silver posts actually falling away. Just to double check, you should now have these 4 silver posts through the holes around your CPU in a square pattern. You're then going to take the female to female posts I mentioned earlier and pop these on top. That will obviously hold the backplate into place, stop it from falling off, and also provide us further mounting for the cooler itself. Bear with me on this one. You do get an included tool which makes it easier to tighten these up with a screwdriver. So use this and get them all nice and tight. You then want to pick up the cooler itself and locate the 4 little screws on each corner. These are slightly adjustable as well to make sure they fit, and then you can drop the cooler onto the CPU. But wait, there is one more thing we need to do first. Drop a dab of thermal paste onto your processor, then seat the cooler and tighten it corner by corner. Don't tighten the screws all the way to begin with, as it will make installing the next screws a bit harder. So go round sort of in laps of the cooler, doing each screw bit by bit to ensure an even, nice fit. And then once that's done, we can move on to the case, adding the fan to the cooler later on. Speaking of the case, this is what I've gone for. Cooler Master's TD500 mesh. Thinking about it, that wasn't very clever because the top of the box is actually completely opened and unsealed. Now this right here is one of my favourite cases of all time. We featured it in so many videos and it's just so good. They've even brought out a baby version called the TD300 mesh, which if I'm honest isn't as good as this case. It feels cheaper. This is built really solidly. Loads and loads of airflow, loads of mesh, loads of RGB fans included. It doesn't get much better. And it's not too big, meaning you can pop it on a desk and it's not going to completely dominate your setup. Really great case, and it's got an etched tempered glass side panel, the gift that keeps on giving. As with any case, we're going to take off the glass side panel first, followed by the steel panel at the rear, making the case much more accessible, allowing us to more easily install the rest of the components. I'm then just going to lay the case down flat, as that will make installing the motherboard the next step a lot easier. Talking of installing the motherboard, grab your board itself and locate all of the standoff holes. These are the holes that are situated across the bottom, middle and top of the board, and what we'll be using to secure it into place. Take a look at the locations on your motherboard and then check that there are standoffs in the right corresponding locations in the case. So just taking a look, we've got 3 at the top, these are all A-OK, 3 across the middle, also fine, and 3 along the bottom. We're just missing one in that bottom left corner. So we're going to add one in there, clip our I/O shield in for the motherboard, and then secure everything down into place. Nice and simple, nice and easy. Just take your time for this bit and make sure to secure it down through all 9 holes. That way your motherboard is virtually guaranteed to not be going anywhere anytime soon. With the motherboard in, we can move on next up to the power supply. Now, I've gone for a bit of an all Cooler Master theme. Cooler Master cooler, Cooler Master case, and a Cooler Master PSU. When it comes to components, they're not always the most interesting of brands, although new monitor and peripheral releases look a promising change to that. But they do make some really good products that you can definitely trust. I've never had a single issue with Cooler Master power supplies, and I'd say we've got about 15 in the office at the moment. So pretty impressive statistics, at least from an anecdotal point of view. This unit is also a fully modular unit, which means we only need to plug in the cables we actually need to use. So you can see here we've got motherboard power connections, PCIe and SATA. I'll walk you through which ones we need to install, starting things off with this one, our 6+2 pin PCIe power connector. This is going to power up the GPU and plugs up to the top of the power supply nice and easily. It's the same connection for our CPUs as well, at least on the power supply end. The CPU cable is the one that's going to follow. As I say, it's different on the motherboard end of things, but the same on the actual power supply interface, so that's going to pop in next to it nice and easily. The motherboard power cable is next up, and it's the penultimate of the cables. This plugs into the very far end of the power supply, so one larger and one smaller connection. And then finally, to wrap things up, we've got a SATA power connection. This is going to plug up to the thin connections on the modular interface just here. Once we've done this, we can grab the case, spin this around, and then slide the power supply in. Fasten it down with 4 screws on each corner at the rear, and that's pretty much it. We're going to do the cables and wiring now too, before installing the GPU, the final component of the build. The first of those is the motherboard power cable, the largest connection of the bunch, which goes to the right hand side of the board, just like so. The 8-pin CPU power connection is next, and this goes up to the top left of the motherboard. This is made up of 4+4 pins rather than 6+2 that detached. That's our GPU for later on. While we're here, we may as well do the front panel connections too. These include the HD audio, which plugs up to the bottom left of the motherboard and has a pin missing, so it only goes in one way around. USB 3, the largest connection of the bunch, goes to the right hand side of our motherboard today. And our JFP1 connections. These are for our power and reset switches, LEDs, all that good stuff. These are the fiddly pins, but we'll pop a diagram on your screen now to make this bit as easy as possible. Just like so, be careful with these, but if you get them wrong, don't worry, you can go back and fix them later. And once we've done that, we can wrap things up with easily the most exciting component today, the GPU. Now, the GPU market is easy, but let me just say it does depend on where you are in the world, what kind of retailers you're buying from. Here in the UK, the situation is a lot better. And I know that in the US, things are getting easier too. I don't know off the top of my head the situation in every country around the world, but fundamentally, globally, GPU prices are dropping on average. Latest pricing and availability can be found below, and it does fluctuate, so it's something to keep in mind. The 3060 is a great card though, giving you a bit more performance than the 3050, which is too a good option if these are too expensive in your region. With plenty of video memory, 12 gigabytes to be precise, it has the edge over its cheaper 3050 brother. And with a really nice cooler from Gigabyte AORUS, this card will do the job nicely. To tell you the truth, any 3060 you can find at a reasonable price point is what I'd pick up, but I'm really happy with our choice for this build. To install the card, what you first need to do is hover it in the case without any of our prep done. So we're just going to hover it on this grey slot, and you can see here that the card wants to populate the second and third PCIe slot covers. That's this one and this one just here. We're going to remove these now, then slide the GPU in place and click it in before adding some GPU power cables up for good measure. This one takes an 8-pin and a 6-pin, which we already plugged in earlier. And once you've done that, the system is pretty much all ready to go. We're now going to boot it up for the first time and test out the gaming performance. But before that, I think we ought to see how good it looks when it's all powered on. I'll see you in the benchmarks, but first, roll that GeekaWhat montage. Looking lovely. This build is certainly pretty good looking when it's all booted up, and personally I think the aesthetic and build proportions are really spot on. But that means nothing if the system just frankly doesn't perform as we need it to in 1080p when playing the latest AAA titles. And that's where the performance section of this video comes in. As usual, I'm going to pop a graphic on screen now to begin with that shows a rough outline of all the performance figures we were able to achieve, and then we'll take a closer look game by game in just a moment. This graphic also gives us some information on temperatures, and Harry, our in-house benchmark whiz, has spent plenty of hours getting the numbers together for this system. Let's begin by taking a closer look at GTA 5, a game where we tested at 1080p high settings. These are settings that we use pretty much across the board, but you'll find a settings menu at the start of each gameplay clip. Looking at GTA 5, as I say, here we managed to pull in 163 frames per second on average, to bring in nearly 165 FPS on a system of this budget is really impressive, and shows the 3060's power as one of Nvidia's more baseline lower tier RTX 30 series cards. It was similarly positive when we tested Battlefield 2042, a game that we actually decided to run at 1440p, first with no DLSS and then with DLSS, so just bear with me for one moment. Without any DLSS enabled, we got 83 frames per second on average, with 90 and 99th percentiles that was still pretty consistent, so not bad overall, while turning DLSS on and setting it to performance mode bumped our frame rate to 101 frames per second, with 86 and 78 on average. The frame rates looked really great, and we were pleased with how the game performed once again. What about the latest COD Vanguard though, the next title on the list? Here we tested at 1080p high settings, and once again pulled in a great frame rate, 131 to be precise, with 117 and 102 for the 90 and 99th percentiles. We'll look at the other COD game in just a moment, but first we're going to look at Forza Horizon 5, one of my personal favourite titles right now, and a great test for you racing gamers out there. Here we pulled in 87 frames per second at 1080p ultra settings, with 83 and 73 for the 90 and 99th percentile results. Moving on to Halo Infinite, here we tested out at 1080p high settings and managed to achieve 125 frames per second on average. 113 and 101 for the 90 and 99th percentile results rounded off a really nice spread, and the game looked once again really good. Talking of games looking really good, Apex Legends, and poor segues, that was very cheesy from me. Here we tested at 1080p high settings and managed to get 152 frames per second on average. To excel 140 or even 150 FPS on average in Apex is really impressive, and I was pleased with the results. Moving on to Valorant next up, and this is a game where no surprises, we got some great performance when testing at 1080p high settings. 385 FPS was our average total counter, while our 90 and 99th percentile results were strong, showing no more than 25% deviance in frame rate, something which was really reassuring to see. The penultimate game on the list, the one but last title to cover, is Fortnite, where we tested out at 1080p competitive settings by popular demand. Here we got 228 frames per second on average, more than enough frame rate to saturate any of those high FPS and refresh rate monitors out there, and the game, even at low settings, looks really good. We did set the render distance to far to make sure we kept that competitive edge, but overall, nice numbers. Finally, to wrap things up, Call of Duty's Warzone, the other COD, the Battle Royale title. Here we tested at 1080p high settings and got 114 frames per second. Absolutely fantastic results in all of our gaming benchmarks today when testing at 1080 and 1440p. And that pretty much wraps it up for this video. If you enjoyed, get subscribed to see more from us. Thanks for watching though, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.